Hello, everybody. I welcome you again in the summit. Dr. Jason is going to present a topic today for us, that is need for medicines in various disabilities. Sir, I would like to introduce you to everyone in the summit today. So Dr. Jason is a national convener, IAP Poor Scholastic Performance Program in 2007 and 2011. He's actively involved in Indian Association of Pediatrics advocacy for children with learning disability. He used to be the secretary and president of the Kerala branch of Indian Association of Pediatrics, and he used to be a secretary and president at NNF Kerala State Branch. He was a past secretary and chairperson at IAP CMIC, past chairperson IAP Neurodevelopmental Chapter 2, ACVIP member of 2016. He's a resource person and master trainer for various IAP action plans. He has authored a book named Life Skills. He contributed various chapters to various pediatric textbooks, published 80 odd articles, and he is an editor at Child India. Dr. Jason is a scientific chairperson at Pediatric Potpourri. So Dr. Jason, we are honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Hope everything is safe on your end.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I'm in hospital, so I'm so happy to be with you all. It's a lovely program. I've been listening to some of the talks, and the last talk by Dr. Anthony D'Souza, I think we must get it for the Indian Pediatrics. We have a neurodevelopment chapter. Dr. Anthony, if you're there, we'd invite you for one of our sessions. Lovely. So today I was supposed to talk on. Let me just try and share the screen. Hello. Cancel. On the Dr. Ramasamy. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, so I was supposed to talk on a very controversial topic of medications for differently able children, because this is last priority. So that's something that, most of these children come with a list of medications that they've been put on, and it's very difficult to tell them that many of these are not required, because some of them have had benefits, some of them have not. So I'm going to demystify that and try to tell you that medications are something that you need to be very careful with. And so I'll just go through some of this material that I wanted to check. Now, these are the conditions for which medications are used in differently able children. There are lots of them. So what we need to know is that patients should be educated about the purpose and the goals for these medications. And they should understand that medications are not curative. And we will wait for the family approval for a trial of medication. So we tell them what the goals of giving these medications are, and that it is not curative, and that they should understand that a trial of medication may be accepted by the family. So the whole family should come for counseling, and they should be told about why we're giving medication and how long it will be given, what are the goals. Never is a medication forced on a patient. So unless they accept that a medication is okay for their child, the child also should be there for the counseling, because most of these children understand what we're talking about, what medication, especially in adults and above. They should know why these medications have been given. And we are supportive of all the other management tools. So more important is the exercise of the psychoeducation strategies, behavioral therapy, all the other physiotherapy, and all the other therapies that are going on. We should be supportive of those management tools. The medications should be started. We started with a very small dose and gradually increase the dose so that it reaches maximum dose or toxicity appears. So medications are, when you do that, the complications of the medications are much less. It's important that we. Hello, please. medications that are helpful would change as the child goes on. It's a story, so the continuous monitoring of these medications are required. And as they reach an adolescence, the medication requirement will increase. More than required, doses are required more than that required for adults because of certain conditions in an adolescent metabolism. And it's important to, in the beginning itself, to share responsibility, tell what the family must do, what the school will work on, what the child should work on, and what the physician would work on, and what the therapist would work on. So the responsibility is explicitly shared and clearly stated before we start medication. Now, I would deal with some of the common conditions where medications are useful. And so one of them is ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So we would check the reports, and unless your confirmed diagnosis by DSM-4 or 5 is available, you would not start medication. So unless there is absolutely, if you're doubtful of the condition, then you would reassess and decide if the child's ADHD is really affecting the child's activity and daily living. As we have said for counseling, everybody should be present while the medication is being considered, and they should be counseled as to what the goals are and how follow-up would be done. And if they're doing some non-pharmacological methods to reduce to improve their attention span, that should be encouraged, and they should be congratulated for the same. They should be informed of how they should inform how the results of these medications are and how they've ensured compliance. So we congratulate them and tell them that they're doing a great job with all the non-pharmacological methods, and medications are only supportive to that. And we would inform in detail about, they'd have to inform us in detail about the home situation, about siblings, and what the problems are that could have affected the child. Details of previous medications are also to be shared. So after this, we'd look at for the family history, because if there's a family history of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, premature cardiac death, Marfan syndrome, anything to do with cardiology, cardiac illnesses in the family or in children, you would not use the stimulant medications. That's something that we would look at. We look for ailments like psychosis, or if there is it's a related contraindication is they've got tic disorder, like they got habit disorder, tics, like blinking the eyes or hands, and habit tics. Then we would, and there are also medications for that, like risperidone, haloperidol, pimozide. We would be careful with giving similar medication. Those with convulsive disorder, seizure disorder, who's got fits, we would. It's generally safe to you if the fits are well controlled on drugs other than phenytoin and phenobarbital, to add stimulant medication. Otherwise, there was a feeling that it would unmask seizures, but that doesn't actually happen now. And we are quite safe in giving medications, even the stimulant medications in children with convulsive disorder, if they are properly controlled. Of course, we'd look for a family history for structural heart disease, if there's a cardiomyopathy, any cardiac disorder, Kawasaki, rheumatic disorder, Marfan's. These are all contraindications to giving a stimulant medication because it could increase pre-existing hypertension, and therefore we are careful with giving these drugs. When children who are on certain drugs like MAO inhibitors, also tricycline antidepressants, if the child got a depressive disorder, we would not use stimulant medications. So must understand that some of these medications would worsen the tics, psychosis, anxiety, abuse potential, fatigue, and insomnia. So these are all conditions which we should be aware of. So if you have decided that the child requires medication for hyperactivity, then the patient and family again would be called together. They'll be told about the purpose and the goals of medication. So this educating is so important. Every visit the child comes, there should be education of what is happening and what the goals have been achieved and what purpose, what requires to be done in the future. We say that medicines are not curative. Every time the child comes, you're talking about medications. If the child is on medication and there is some relief with medication. And we must say that while it might successfully be successful in treating some of the core symptoms of ADHD, they may still have trouble with friends and schoolwork. So it may not be a fully curative for their hyperactivity syndrome. So, as we already mentioned, we would not force a child on to medication. Consent is of all concern should be there before trial of medication is given. And you try the medication for 3 months, and if there is relief, and you reassess and there is an improvement in their hyperactivity, and that is affecting their schooling and other daily activities of daily living, then you continue the medication. So we'll explain to the family that the IAP neurodevelopment chapter strongly supports use of stimulant medication in children above the age of 6 or 7. For children younger than that, younger children, behavior therapy would be token economy. You have reinforcement behavior of approved behavior. You have timeout and other things which will be done as soon as the diagnosis of hyperactivity is made in a small child. And if it is started early, the compliance to your behavior therapy will be good. And a combination of behavior therapy and medication would be much better than medication alone. That is to be continued. And if you want good compliance to your behavior therapy, it should be started early. Now, when you compare the various medications used for hyperactivity, there's no difference between the methylphenidate and the stimulant and the non-stimulant drugs, not much difference. So you could use either stimulant medication, that methylphenidate, or non-stimulant medication, atomoxetine. These are the 2 drugs that are available. Now, how do we use these stimulants? Now, we use the stimulant medication in children according to their study routine. If a child is studying in the daytime, early morning, getting up in the morning and studying, the medication should, if the hyperactivity usually is associated with some inattention. So if there is a concentration problem, the child is not able to concentrate on studies, unless the medication is given, he will not be able to study because his concentration span is so short. He will not be able to concentrate on studies and imbibe what he's learning. So therefore, even for therapy, sometimes medication, the hyperactivity and the inattention has to be treated. Only then there is response to the treatment that you're giving. So there are 3 types of stimulant medication. One is immediate acting, that is 4-hour action. It acts for about 4 hours. The sustained release tablets will last about 6 to 8 hours. And your control release tablet will last for 12 hours. So your treating physician should be able to adjust the doses so that the learning occurs when the medication is on. Preferably, these children should not be given a stimulant medication, especially the immediate acting medication, after the 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. Otherwise, it will affect their sleep in the night. So therefore, the medication has to be adjusted according to, you start with a very small dose and gradually increase. You initially want to make sure that the concentration is good during the daytime and school. So early morning before going to school and lunch break at school would help the concentration to be, but 4 hours is action. So if we started, give a dose at about 8 o'clock when he goes to school, at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the recess time, lunchtime, if he gets another small dose, it will take care of the next 4 hours. So the concentration in school will be good. So after 3 months, you reassess and see if this is affecting, this has made a difference. You ask the teacher, you ask the parents, you ask the child how his ability to study is. If there is improvement, and you do a DSM-5 assessment again, or Vanderbilt assessment, and you find that there is improvement, then he requires his medication as long as he studies as long as studies is important for him. So the medication may have to be adjusted according to the time. So if after a while, maybe the sustained release or the control release tablets would be good for giving longer duration of action. Now you must monitor all the side effects. So child could have nausea, vomiting. There could be some reduction in weight because there's a lot of, it might affect their appetite. Headaches is one of the conditions, reasons for withdrawing the drug. There could be a tolerance. You have to taper the dose if there's tolerance. If there's insomnia, you have to make sure that you try not to add drugs that induce sleep. If there is rebound hyperactivity, when you use this immediate acting medication, after the medication effect goes, the child may have an increase in their hyperactivity. In those cases, you have to change over to the sustained release or the control release tablet so that the drug delivery is continuous for a long time. The sudden increase in those levels of the methylphenidate and sudden decrease can produce hyperactivity when the drug effect is reduced. So that can be prevented. You can unmask tics in Tourette syndrome, which we have already mentioned, and BP should be monitored. So there are other side effects which we would look for are these. Atomoxetine has an advantage that it's not a control extra, because methylphenidate has to be given with two prescriptions, and only few medical shops in the vicinity would have the license to use to dispense those drugs, so that you must understand. And therefore, atomoxetine is an over-the-counter drug, so it's not a controlled substance and doesn't produce habit forming. Though methylphenidate is thought to be habit forming, it is not so. The drug of choice for ADHD and substance abuse disorder is atomoxetine. If the child has comorbidities like psychiatric disorders and all that, or tics, atomoxetine may be used. It causes sedation, so if you use it in the morning, the child might be sedated during school initially for about 2-3 weeks, and it takes about 2-3 weeks for atomoxetine to have effect. The methylphenidate effect is within 15 minutes of giving the drug, and it's only for that duration of the duration that I said, 4 hours, 6 hours, or 12 hours, that the effect is there. Atomoxetine takes 2 to 3 weeks for effect, so you need to wait for the effect to come, and those first 2-3 weeks can cause a lot of sedation. And when you do the comparison between the drugs, there are a lot of studies which show that there is not much difference between the two. What about autism? Does medicines work for autism? It was realized that there is no efficacious treatment for the core social symptoms of autism. So the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Indian Academy of Pediatrics suggests that you target 1 or 2 main problems, that behaviors that these children have, and treat only that. You have many of these autistic children coming with a large portion of 8-9 drugs. That is a problem. And so we must realize what we're treating and understand that it is very difficult to understand the problems that an autistic child has. Each child responds differently to medications, and the change in response to medications occur with time, even if the dose is not changed. So that's something that happens in the autistic children. And it is best to use medications only after behavioral educational methods have been tried. So that's important. And the problem with studies on pharmacotherapy of autism is that autism is such an extraordinarily heterogeneous disorder that manifestation is influenced by many variables. So when you're treating a particular core symptom of autism, another symptom might get worse. So it's very difficult to assess and there is no gold standard for the measurement of change in autism symptoms in clinical trials. So it's very difficult to say whether the drug is really effective or not. And we're looking for biomarkers of autism. There's a lot of studies going on for looking at biomarkers. And like for instance, tuberous sclerosis and Fragile X, you have biomarkers. So using biomarkers, you might be able to assess the effect of drugs on a particular core symptom of autism. But now we have a study from which says that you can use CARS for assessment, and that's something that we must look into to see whether you can use this particular statistical analysis to understand the effect of drug on various core symptoms of autism. Medications that are allowed or systematic reviews are there, and there's evidence for some of these drugs for some of the symptoms of autism. When you're checking the drug effect on a symptom of autism, we're only checking on one aspect of autism. So for the atypical antipsychotics which are recommended and which there's FDA approval and there's evidence, is for treating the social withdrawal and stereotypic behaviors alone, and maybe the aggressive behavior. It is only for these aspects if that is causing a problem for this child with autism spectrum disorder, to use these drugs. Risperidone and aripiprazole are the 2 drugs which are recommended. So risperidone, the scales have shown that it affects stereotypy and aggression in autistic children. It's much reduced when you use risperidone. You use a low dose and gradually increase. But there are a lot of side effects for risperidone. You might have drowsiness. That's a very significant side effect of all the other interventions that you do for autism spectrum disorders might be affected when you're treating with risperidone. So you have to adjust the dose so that it doesn't produce much of drowsiness. It causes weight gain and dyslipidemia, and your cholesterol and all that might change, might increase when you're using risperidone. And excessive drooling and extrapyramidal tremors, rigidity are not uncommon. So these are side effects which you must look for in risperidone. Aripiprazole is also a drug. There are some children who are not getting good effect with risperidone. Use aripiprazole, which is also useful for. What about antidepressants in autism spectrum disorder, these are 2 drugs which are used, but most studies have shown that systematic reviews have shown that SSRIs have no effect on the children and limited effect in adults. So you must use these drugs very sparingly, and only the experienced person should be using these drugs. And SSRIs all these drugs that is used for depression, that is effective for reducing the repetitive behaviors. So repetitive behaviors is one of the core symptoms of autism. And for that, if it's really significantly affecting the child's activity, you could use one of these. But you must be aware that this could cause activation and agitation in this population. So that should be factored when you use antidepressants for ASD. If there is hyperactivity along with autism spectrum disorder, the older studies showed that it would cause an increase in side effects and cause increase in irritability, self-injury, and stereotypy when you use methylphenidate. But later, more studies showed that when you use a lower dose, half the dose of what you use for ADHD alone, you would get some response. And 50% of children with ADHD with autism spectrum disorder, when you use the lower dose, half the dose that you use for ADHD alone, you had some improvement in their hyperactivity impulsivity. Though the response would not be the same as with ADHD alone. When you have ADHD alone, the response with methylphenidate is about 80% or 90% in the responders. So that you will not get in with ASD and ADHD combined, but it is effective when you use a lower dose. The side effects are less when you use the lower dose. And it also, there were secondary side effects, secondary good effects, that it improved the initiation of joint attention, improved response to bids for joint attention, and self-regulation and regulated affective state was improved when you use the methylphenidate. Atomoxetine are very few studies on comorbid ADHD and ASD, and it's usually used for high functioning autism spectrum disorder. And there are most studies, other studies have shown not much improvement. These are the newer lines of therapies that are there. I don't think I'll go into this. These are new drugs which are used for the core symptoms of autism, which are in clinical trial. What about sleep disorders? It's a big problem for children with autism spectrum disorder. 50 to 80% of children with autism spectrum disorder have a sleep problem, and there are so many other conditions which you need to be assessed first: epilepsy, reflux, regurgitation of food into the esophagus and above, poor sleep hygiene, and behavioral insomnia of childhood. These are all conditions which could affect sleep in children with ASD, and those have to be assessed and treated. It is exacerbated by communication challenges unique to autism. So there's a difficulty from transition from wake to sleep that could be affected. So these are things that need to be dealt with before we think of medication. The fact is that there's so many children on medications used for sleep. You find this prescription of, you have these studies which show that 37% of children are taking one sleep medication, and some of them are taking 4 medications for sleep. So that's the problem. And given that behavioral insomnia in childhood and inadequate sleep hygiene were commonly diagnosed sleep disorders, treatments that emphasize sleep, parent sleep education, either alone or in combination with medication, appear to be warranted. And so behavioral therapy and calming bedtime sleep hygiene is more important than medication. But medication, if it's really required, it is used short term. For about 3-4 months, you could use melatonin. Short term, what it does is that reduces the latency to sleep. It takes latency to sleep, meaning the time taken for the child to sleep from the time the child is put to sleep. That's the latency to sleep, the sleep onset latency. It reduces by 20-30 minutes. That's all it does. So it could be used for all children different labels except tuberous sclerosis. Melatonin is a drug which could use for 2-3 months. There are long-term studies which are not as effective, but short-term, when you want to adjust sleep, you can try this for 2-3 months. The other drug that is used is mirtazapine. This is what is, there are 25 medications used for sleep, and many children are on many of these medications. But the systematic reviews will tell you that sleep medications are not successful at treating sleep disturbances. And sleep medications, even if successfully treating these sleep disturbances, they do not favorably affect the daytime behaviors and quality of life. So the use of sleep medications should be short-term and assessed frequently, whether it could be stopped or not. Depression in a lot of children with autism and differently able children who cannot really communicate their feelings, it's very difficult to diagnose depression in these children. And because they have a communication deficit, the atypical presentation of ASD might look like depression. The standardized tools are not available for diagnosing depression in autistic children. It's very difficult for pediatricians to even pick up on depression in normal children, typically developing children. So it's more difficult in children with autism. And a lot of children with autism have depression as a comorbid condition. So treatment of with medication or psychotherapy may be beneficial. Though research is required, further research is required to see how effective they are. And this is what the studies will show you, that there's a lot of children on antidepressants, ASD children, differently able children that are on antidepressants. And it's used left, right, and center. Psychotropic medications are more useful in adults with ASD than more used in children with adults with ASD and in high functioning ASD, where the diagnosis of depression could be more easily made. But you have so many of these children having 2 or more classes of psychotropic medications. So that is something that we must avoid. The use of SSRIs we already mentioned, it is used for repetitive behaviors in children with ASD and for depression. There is Cochrane review says that the use of antidepressants, recommended use of SSRIs for depression on a case-to-case basis only. So every child should be assessed by a good psychiatrist who knows about. So sometimes you send us ASD or a child with Down syndrome to a psychiatrist, they will say this child doesn't have depression. They can't diagnose depression. So it is important that children, the psychiatrists or child psychiatrists will know about how to pick up depression in a child with ASD. Say a child with ASD, there'll be a change in behavior, there will be more screaming, there'll be difficulty in the response to your therapies, which are going well, suddenly it's not effective. So some changes in behavior are something that could may mean depression. So this has to be picked up by these children, by the psychiatrist and the physician who's looking at the pediatrician, development pediatrician looking after this child. So if you diagnose it, then probably the children could be put on SSRIs that we have already mentioned, that's fluoxamine or fluoxetine or citalopram. There are various antidepressants could be used. But you must remember that these drugs also have side effects, as we already mentioned. Behavioral activation, irritability, acathy, and sleep disturbances could occur. So behavioral therapy is more important for depression than for drugs, and cognitive behavior therapy could be used, and there are certain techniques for cognitive behavior therapy in children with ASD and those with differently able children. What about anti-convulsions and any disorder of the brain? It's a spectrum of brain disorders. So if you have also autism spectrum disorder, if you have learning disability, if you have ADHD, it's something to do with the brain. There's a neurodevelopmental problem. So if you have one of them, you're going to have many more. You can have conduct disorders, depression, anxiety. A lot of other conditions can be expected over time. As a child grows, you're going to have prepared to be facing all the other brain-related disorders that could happen. Seizures occurs in 5 to 38% of children with ASD, or even more. So you have these subtle seizures. Are another thing that's very difficult to diagnose in a child with ASD, because see, some of these behaviors like staring episodes, motor tics, and stereotyping behaviors maybe look like seizures. So it's very different. And EEGs may be sometimes abnormal in a child who doesn't have seizures with ASD. So the slight changes in EEG may not mean the child is convulsive disorder. So extended overnight EEG and a proper pediatric neurologist who understands EEGs, who's read a lot of EEGs of children with ASD, only can pick up seizure disorder in a child with ASD with autism spectrum disorder. Because many of these subclinical electrical discharges which occur with LKS syndrome and continuous spike wave activity during slow wave sleep may look like seizure disorder. They have symptoms that look much like ASD, but they're not ASD. So these have to be picked up by a good pediatric neurologist. What about the drugs that are used for convulsive disorder or seizure disorder in ASD? It is the newer drugs that are useful. Valproate, lamotrigine, levetiracetam, and ethosuximide are probably the best. And valproate and lamotrigine are the least detrimental effect on mood. Lamotrigine appear to have least adverse effects of all, so that may be a drug of choice. But you must avoid older seizure disorder drugs for seizures, that is phenobarbital, phenytoin, primidone. These drugs, the older drugs used for meeting and not. So you must avoid these older drugs that are used for convulsive disorder. Only the newer drugs are useful. What about mood disorders? How do you pick up mood disorders in children with ASD? Irritability, mood instability. seizures, manic and depressive symptoms. These are all symptoms that may be requiring mood stabilizers. And these are drugs, valproate, divalproate, carbamazepine, lamotrigine. These are drugs that can be used. Lithium is rarely used. What about anxiety? You have this child who has got a lot of anxiety disorders. There's no time to go through this whole case history. But this child has got a lot of anxieties over time. It just goes on increasing the anxiety that he has. So you must be able to pick up the anxiety in these children, because these are all comorbid conditions, as I said, because of the spectrum of CNS disorders. And so investigating our ongoing on the efficacy. There are a lot of investigations going on the efficacy of modified CBT protocol, because in the children with ASD have difficulty understanding your behavior therapy. So there are certain modified CBT protocols which are used for ASD, and this is investigations are going on to its effect. And in addition to including core CBT, social coaching and development of emotional regulation skills are crucial for social functioning. And SSRIs may be used again here also for anxiety. Fluoxetine is approved for depression and obsessive compulsive disorder in children with ASD. The others are fluoxamine and sertraline also used in pediatric OCD. The several large RCTs for efficacy of SSRIs. And to summarize, the research is going on the effect of drugs for anxiety disorders and repetitive behaviors. And both treatment modalities have limitations. RCTs of cognitive behavior therapy shows better response. And there are very few RCTs on medications for anxiety, which are adequately targeted or assessed. So therefore, these studies are very difficult to conduct in children with ASD. And therefore, a lot of newer drugs are being tried, and that is something that we will go through. What about GI problems in children with autism? All these have been treated. 23 to 70% of children have problems with their gut, 8 times more common in children with autism than other children. So all these can happen, all these conditions are mentioned in this list. So we're talking about gut microbiota in ASD and the gut, leaky guts effect on autism. And the use of probiotics and prebiotics is something that is being studied, though there's not enough evidence for the use of these drugs. It is being used in some children. Constipation, abdominal pain, gastrointestinal reflux, irritable bowel syndrome, these all have to be treated like for normal children. Because these are all can cause pain, cause sleeping problems, sleep issues, and can worsen symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. So there's no simple solution. Multidisciplinary approach is the norm. Comorbidity is the norm. Track the target symptoms to assess the effectiveness, but do not give up. There are no effective medications for the core symptoms of autism. Very careful, be very, very careful while using medications in this condition. Each comorbid condition requires evaluation by an appropriate specialist. Target 1 or 2 major problems these children have for considering medication. Use only drugs that have sufficient evidence for targeted comorbid behavior. Start with a small dose and gradually increase. And keep in mind that other symptoms might get aggravated. Try to taper and stop as soon as possible. So these are issues which we should deal with. I don't know if I have the time to deal with spasticity in children in cerebral palsy. Do I have the time?
Yes, sir. It's like 15 minutes more you can present, sir.
Okay, so
because we have questions.
Okay, the other issue is how do you treat spasticity in children with cerebral palsy? These are various drugs that have been used for spasticity. Here again, you have a lot of problems with deciding which drug is useful. This is be carefully assessed by the patient because it requires careful assessment of the patient's other impairments like weakness, movement disorders, and the proper selection of treatment of drug is most important. Reasons to treat the spasticity include it will reduce pain and spasms, facilitate use of braces, improves posture, minimizes contractures and deformities, and facilitates mobility and dexterity, and improves the patient's ease of care. So these are issues which could be affected by reducing the spasticity in a child. And over 31 years, several pharmacological methods have been tried for CP. The benzodiazepines, dantrolene, baclofen, tizanidine, blocking agents like Botox, phenol, and alcohol have all been tried. Intrathecal baclofen is another thing that is might be useful when you want to have generalized antispastic effect. So these are drugs which have been studied, and there are a lot of gaps in care because it's positive research on treatment of spasticity. All these issues are definitely which is positive of good results. So it's very difficult to decide which drug to use. But so it's left to the physician to decide, and after good counseling of the parent and the child. So the physician would focus on treating impairment, not the activity or participation, but not activity or participation. And there's a strong evidence that the efficacy of Botox in spasticity, but no evidence for the efficacy of other medications for use of spasticity. So the main drug that can be used is Botox. Bond A is Botox, which injections which are used to reduce spasticity. This is the most widely used drug for focal spasticity, as it avoids generalized weakness and sedation. All the oral medication could produce generalized weakness and sedation. So this is something it takes care of certain areas, certain major spastic areas which could be targeted. So that's the use of the Botox injections. Its mechanism of action is something that we would not deal with. It actually affects the acetylcholine release from the presymptomatic nerve terminals. And it has a calming effect on muscular contraction. So it blocks the transmission of nerve impulses. So the effect starts within 48 to 72 hours of the injection, and it's reversible. It lasts for over 3 to 4 months. So in this 3 to 4 months, you can do a lot of things while the spasticity is less. These are the areas which the calf muscles, the gastrocnemius soleus, the calf muscles, hamstrings are the muscles for the thigh, hip adductors, and flexor synergy muscles. Flexor, that is in the upper arm, for this scapula, for the shoulder, for the elbow, forearm supination, and wrist and finger flexion. These are the flexor synergy muscles. It's a group of muscles in the upper, which are used for flexion of the arm, which is required for eating and all that. So spasticity in these areas could be treated with Botox. Mainly it's for the calf muscles, hamstring muscles, so it helps in walking. So it improves the ability of the child to walk and use hands for various activities. So this is what you use. When you reduce spasticity, you're able to make the child more functional. It allows for better fitting of the orthotics by reducing the spasticity. When the splints and other equipment that you use for making the child able to walk and use his hands could be better fitted if you have less reduction of spasticity. So this improves the ability to use these orthotics. And when you reduce the overactive or powerful muscle of one side, suppose the calf muscles are very active, and that makes the leg more plantar flexor fixed towards the downwards at the ankle. When you reduce the strength of the powerful muscle, you can work on the strengthening the opposite side muscles, antagonic muscles. So this is another good effect of reducing localized spasticity. And you could use scars when these injections are given, and which reduces and you can stretch the tight muscles. So these are the effects of using Botox in these children. And so these are the things that could use with Botox. You do the casting, the orthotis, physical therapy, occupational therapy could all be done. And it lasts for about 3 to 4 months, and then you might require repeat injection depending on the condition. You use the smallest dose of Botox as possible, avoiding injecting more frequently than 3 months to reduce the chance of antibody resistance developing to the drug. The side effects are there. It could produce this difficulty in swallowing, difficulty talking, weakness, dyspnea, and respiratory distress. So once a child who's on Botox, the physician or the surgeon or the neurologist, pediatric neurologist would know all the side effects, and as the side effects develop, and if any of these side effects develop, the patient should report back to the neurologist or someone who's done the injection. It could occur as early as 1 day after the injection, or maybe several weeks after treatment. So you have to wait for several weeks to see if these complications develop and then report. And it is important that we know all the problems of these drugs before these use, and the parents be told about the complications and how to detect and pick up these complications early. What about diazepam? Or diazepam is Campos or Valium or some drug which is a benzodiazepine. The short-term effect for spasticity may be, but there's no study addressing whether diazepam improves motor function. There are side effects, and so therefore this drug is also not a regularly used drug. So baclofen is another drug which is muscle relaxant, and there's conflicting evidence of use of oral baclofen, but it is used by many people dealing with cerebral palsy. Many of the physicians and orthopedic surgeons and neurologists use baclofen. But there is insufficient evidence to support or refute the use of oral baclofen, but you could use this drug. So the most commonly used is Botox, the next is baclofen. What about managing the saliva control in children with CP? Most of the children there could be a lot of collection of saliva, maybe from the front of the mouth, or maybe posteriorly it could be pooling, and the secretions could cause coughing and choking and aspiration. So these are severe when this because of midbrain involvement, you have difficulty with swallowing and this collection of saliva. So you must assess so maybe due to muscles in the mouth, a lot of areas could be affected, could affect the collection of saliva in the mouth and drooling. So this is something that should be assessed, and positioning, medical history, reflux, dental issues, and all should be assessed before starting therapy. Now, the drugs that we use are anticholinergics like glycopyrronium bromide. You can use it by oral or enteral tube. This reduces the secretions a lot. The other drugs are not that frequently used, but the most used is glycopyrronium bromide. And if this doesn't work, then you could use Botox injections to the salivary gland under ultrasound guidance. It's also by a specialist who understands how to do this. And it reduces severity and frequency of drooling if the anticholinergics don't work. The other possibility is surgery, which is also something that has to be considered in very severe cases where both these methods don't work. Thank you so much. I don't know if I have been able to confuse you or made it more easy for you to understand. I'll take the questions if there are any.
So yes, it was easy to understand. I think the parents have some doubts, and since they have doubts, I can assume yes, they are understanding the thing. The question coming up from Mrs. Pinky Biswas is that my son is 2 years 6 months old. He's taking steroid course 2 times now. Other medicines.
I couldn't understand that. How old?
2.6 months.
2.5 years.
2.6 years. Yes.
2.5 years.
And he's on a steroid course.
Steroids.
Steroids and other medicines to control seizure. Keto diet is also on. So
what's on?
Keto diet. Sorry.
He's on what? Keto diet.
Keto diet.
Yeah.
And is keto diet the last option to control seizure? So somewhere I think she's trying to compare the way down if medicines are okay or seizures can be controlled with keto diet. Exactly how to manage seizure.
Yeah, very difficult to control seizures where you require 3-4 medications and still there's continuous seizures. The child is not doing at all well. Keto diet could be tried. Keto diet is it's very difficult for children unless they're not they're intellectually not very well versed, then probably keto diet is possible. Otherwise, intelligent child is very difficult to institute keto diet regularly. But keto diet sometimes is effective. If that doesn't work, then surgery is available. Cytostatic surgery for seizures is also being done, and you do a functional MRI, find out which areas of the brain are being activated due to the seizures. That could also be effective. So there are possibilities for refractory seizures which should be checked out, because every seizure is going to affect the mentation a little bit. Every seizure, there's going to be some deterioration of your mentation. So therefore, control of seizures is so very important. There is a process. So you try drugs as much as possible. You adjust your drugs. You might require polytherapy. Most of the time you try monotherapy, one drug only. But sometimes you land up having 3-4 drugs and still not controlled, and you try keto diet, and if keto diet is enough, then probably steroid surgery is something that you must consider.
Okay. So it depends on the proper assessment of the child.
Yeah.
If the child is okay with just one drug, that's good, but multiple drugs may take action, or sometimes keto diet can help if the child is intellectually not well versed, not understanding well, or the last option can be surgery.
Yeah.
Okay. We have our next question from Sunita Mehta. She's asking if medicines have to be taken for a lifetime. I think the question is continued over here in autistic adults for aggression, depression, obsession, and anxiety.
Yeah, depending, see, I told you that no drug treats the core symptoms of autism. There are a lot of drugs being investigational now, whether intranasal oxytocin is effective. There are certain studies which show that it is effective in treating the core symptoms, but we are not being using it regularly. So we treat each condition depending on how much it's affecting a child. If the treatment is showing an effect, that should be continued and gradually tapered over time and to see if we can withdraw or not. So if a child, you can't say for sure for that every child requires medication lifelong, but that has to be assessed on a periodic basis and regular follow-ups to see what the side effects of the drug. There are not enough good evidence for drugs in autism spectrum disorder. As I said, you're treating only some of the core symptoms, some of the symptoms that are causing a problem for this child. So if it is really a problem, depression or an older autistic person, a lot of depression would be there. So this person needs to be treated. Otherwise, therapy will not happen. All the therapies that you're giving may not have the same effect, will not be there unless comorbid conditions are treated. So depending on the particular person's symptoms, you could treat with drugs, but you have to be careful with the drugs used. And too many drugs, have these prescriptions of 8-9 drugs, and it's very difficult to tell the parents, you don't need so many drugs because there has been some effect somewhere. So when there is an effect in an area, it's very difficult to gradually, very careful counseling, regular counseling, and gradually tapering one drug of the other and seeing whether it has effect or not. But whether it is not causing a worsening of symptoms, and gradually taper the drugs to minimum drugs possible in a particular person. It's not easy to control the drug use in children with ASD because parents are going from pillar to post to try and find some solution. They're looking for a quick fix. There's no quick fix. There's no way, you give it a drug and it's not like treating an infection. You treat and you get better. It doesn't happen.
Right. So the medications that you generally prescribe are for the symptoms, not for the diagnosis.
The only drug that is useful is risperidone for aggression and repetitive behaviors, and maybe SSRIs for repetitive behaviors in depression. Otherwise, if there's convulsive disorder, you treat the convulsive disorder, but treating depression and convulsive disorders requires a lot of expertise in children with ASD.
Okay. I'll go to the next question. My child is diagnosed with ASD and Fragile X syndrome. He is now 5.7 years old, and to make him sleep, 5.7. Fragile X.
What?
Fragile X.
Fragile X. Okay.
Yeah, and it is a big task to make him sleep. They have never given any medicine except for Atarax syrup, and only on that day when he's actually very much irritated and frustrated. So Atarax is given only when he's irritated and frustrated. What do you suggest? Shall I give him medicine to sleep? As I'm also following same routine, calming music, but because of his lockdown, he's not going anywhere except for cycling. So they're confused if medications for sleep have to be given.
No. Medications for sleep, as I said, doesn't actually help the sleep disturbance and doesn't affect the daytime problems and the quality of life. But it reduces the latency to sleep. So by 20 to 30 minutes, he'll sleep earlier. If you put him to sleep, it takes hours to sleep. It might reduce it by 20 to 30 minutes. So melatonin is the drug that could be tried. Melatonin tried with 3 milligrams per night. every day at the same time in the night. You could try and increase the dose till you get the effect, and then it may be used for 3-4 months, and then maybe taper and stop, and see whether that regulates the sleep or not. It's a sleep regulator. It sleeps. Sometimes these children, it is effective in reducing the sleep problems, and they don't require the medication long term. But there are studies on long term use of melatonin, but the studies are not very, not many studies are there for long term use. So at least try for 2-3 months and see if that has an effect. Melatonin is used in Melocet. Melocet is MELOCT, is a drug that is available in the market. Start with 3 milligram per night, and then gradually increase. Maybe you can use 2 tablets in an older child, and see the effect, and then reduce it over 3 months time and see if that helps. Of course, all the other sleep hygiene techniques have to be used, like nothing, no very active, hyperactive, nothing to be done 1 hour before sleep, and the lights off all over the house. Everyone sleeps together. Only the night lamp should be there. No patting, no feeding to sleep, no patting, no singing to the child to sleep. That should all be avoided, because all these sounds that, sleep associations to be avoided. Sleep associations meaning what do you do to put the child to sleep? We wake up 3-4 times in the night. REM sleep, the light sleep period. So when you're waking up, everything is not the same as when you went to sleep. He'll become fully awake. So sleep disturbance, if your child has listening to music to sleep, when he gets into REM sleep and that music is not there, he'll become fully awake. He'll become cranky again. He'll put this music again. So all these associations with sleep, that is your sounds and lights and patting and tapping and singing and rocking or feeding to sleep, should be avoided. These are all sleep associations which would help reduce sleep disturbances. The child will not wake up every time. See, we wake up 4 times or 5 times a night. We see dreams. We might talk in the night. We might get up and walk. We might move our position, change our positions. We might brush our teeth. But morning we won't realize we woke up 5 times a night. These are all light sleep periods which normally people go through. But a child who has got autism spectrum disorder or different able child, when he goes to sleep, if the sleep associations are not avoided, every time the child wakes up, if everything's not the same as when he went to sleep, he'll become fully awake. So all the sleep associations have to be avoided, and it will take some time. Self-soothing will take a little time, but if that happens and the child sleeps without any assistance, he will sleep better through the night.
Okay. Next question that we are taking is, does risperidone have any role in increasing attention?
Risperidone has been used mainly for aggression. When a child is very aggressive, self-harm, when they're harming themselves, biting themselves, and when there is repetitive behaviors, and that's what it's used for. Because it's a calming effect is there, it might increase that attention span, but attention span, you need to use methylphenidate. If it's really affecting your daily activity and affecting your therapy, then probably low dose of methylphenidate is better than using risperidone. Risperidone is given at night at a small dose. It produces a lot of drowsiness. So if there's drowsiness, it's going to affect all the other therapies.
Okay. Next question is,
but don't hesitate to use risperidone when required. When there's harming, when self-harm, when there's aggressive behavior, don't hesitate to use it, because a lot of people are not using risperidone when required. So don't be wary of using risperidone, because that is one drug which has got evidence, which has got license from FDA, and IAP and the Indian IAP are recommending risperidone as the only drug that's got some evidence for repetitive behaviors, self-harm and aggressive behavior in ASD.
Okay, sir. Next question that we are taking is related to the GI issue. Arshia Bathul is asking, can PET scan be useful for diagnosing stomach?
What can we use? PET scan.
PET scan. Yes, and he keeps crying like a meltdown. Then he has stomach pain. It's a 5.8-year-old boy.
Has he got constipation? Has he got I don't know. See, if there is any GI issues like constipation, reflux, these are all can cause seizure disorder, which can manifest as excessive crying and stomach pain. So these are all issues which need to be checked before we start some medication. I don't think PET scan is the PET scan will. What does PET scan do? PET scan is used for finding out areas that hello, ഒരു അരമണിക്കൂർ വിളിക്കോ, അരമണിക്കൂർ വിളിക്കോ meeting. So PET scan is used to pick up areas which have got more fast multiplying area, cells. So you've got inflammation, you've got malignancy, you've got some, there you'll pick up like lymph nodes which have got multiplying, very fast multiplying areas, especially for malignancies and things like that. You use PET scan. It is not a recommended method for finding out any gut problem. Gut issues can be detected. If there is a, see what you're talking about, reflux. Reflux, if you check whether the child has got a reflux, you may have to do a cholecystoscopy. If there is a constipation, you must treat that. The gut biome, see, there's a lot of these things on prebiotics and probiotics for ASD. So if that is recommended, maybe you could try that for a short time and see the effect. There's a lot of studies on gluten-free and this casein-free diets for children with ASD. Those also have to be very carefully monitored, because sometimes you stop all gluten, you stop all casein-related drugs, and you're going to have malnutrition and a lot of problems related to that. So therefore, it should be there. Each of those agents should be gradually stopped and gradually put back into diet, and see the effect of 2-3 months of avoiding a particular casein-related food stuff, and then gradually putting them back and seeing. So it requires a lot of follow-up and a very person who's done this work a lot to understand how to manage these gut issues with ASD.
Okay. One question, I think this should be the last question. My son is of 13 years age, going to regular school in 6th class, has insomnia, behavior issues, lack of concentration on ASD, no to moderate scale, repetitive habits like music and gastric issues, fussy eating habits, no medication going on, no therapy going on. He's very thin, underweight, only 25 kg. Please help in sleep problem, behavior issues, repetitive habits, eating issues, weight, and gastric reflux.
No, so 25 kilos at 14 years means he's very, very underweight. Depending on his height, you must check his height, check whether it's high, or put it on the growth chart and see if the height is adequate for weight. See, when you put on the growth chart, if the height is at the 3rd centile, so like for 25 kilos for a boy, you put on a growth chart, so 14 years. For 14 years, you said, no, 14 years, the minimum height is 30 kilos. 30 kilos is the 3rd centile, meaning only 3 children at 14 years will have less weight than 30. 97 would have more. That is the minimum. So if it's only 25 kilos at 14 years, he's got a feeding problem. If he's got ASD, maybe he's got problems with certain, it might be sensory integration problem, where some foods he may not take at all. Hello. Oh, no, waiting. Okay, so his diet has to be assessed. He needs to increase. If he check his height first, if his height at 25 kilos, probably his height should be around 135 centimeters. So it's very below the normal. If his height is the only 135, 136, or 25 kilos is okay. But if his height is much more than that, always during the adolescent period, the child should have enough weight for height. Put plot on a chart, see the weight. If the whatever the weight height level is, like for instance, if he's 50th centile on the height, he should have 50th centile on weight also. If that is not there, nutritional assessment should be done, and that has to be corrected. So if his nutrition improves, weight is appropriate for height, and probably sleep disturbances and his ASD all could get better. The sleep disturbances is not very severe. The ASD is reportedly not very severe. So probably nutrition is something that you must look at.
Right.
In this child.
Yeah. So it is going to be again a team play, because the therapist need to first of all look at the sensory integration part, the tactile issues the child is facing with respect to eating, so that the nutrition comes at place, and even if you want to recommend any medications, that would be at a healthy level.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
1 o'clock already.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one last question, is stress major cause of seizures? Can reducing stress help in controlling seizures instead of medication? And also there is a belief that seizures subside or get cured itself by age. Is this true?
Never. No, I think if it's convulsive disorder and if MRIs are normal and there's no other organic cause in the brain causing seizures, you should get controlled within 3 years' time of regular medication. If there's no seizures for 3 years, probably in 2 or 3 years, you can stop the medication. Stress will not increase seizures. Febrile seizure, fever, when the child has fever, maybe it can stimulate the brain. The brain can be stimulated, but stress, unlikely. And discontinuing medication depends on whether there is a organic cause. If the brain is normal, MRI is normal, and there is no other metabolic disorder that's causing the seizure disorder, maybe you can stop the drug within 2-3 years.
Okay. Okay. Sir, that is it with the questions. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Such a
Thank
busy
you so much.
schedule.
To
It was
other
nice
meetings.
because there were,
Thank you,
yeah,
sir.
there were
Harshali,
lot
nice
of
to see you.
questions.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, it was great. Great to be on. I listened to Anthony's talk. It was lovely. It is nice to have this program going, and I've been so busy, so I've not been able to see most of the other programs, but I'm sure it'll be great. Is it on YouTube? Hello?
Sorry, this we will put it. Recordings will be available afterwards, sir.
Okay, I think that'll be great because our
I cannot hear you properly. Hello. Yes.
enjoy
Yes, sir.
all the sessions because some of these sessions have been great. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope it was useful. It is
Sorry.
I
Thank
hope,
you.
yeah, thank you. Shall I leave?
Yes, sir. It is useful, sir, and thank you so much for your time and guidance. It was very nice, sir.
All the best. Thank
Yes.
you. All the best for the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So parents, we will stop for a lunch now, and please wait for further announcement. 1 to 2 we will take a break, and further I will announce in the group. Thank you.